Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Monday, July 19th, 2021. And this is episode 65.2. It's our Indie Spotlight. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for the evening. And as we usually do, we're looking at indies from 5 years ago, which for this, our seventh season, will be indies from 2016. And the fun part about the last couple of years is that we were on the air 5 years ago, and so we can address films that have appeared on the top 10 list that we did that year, starting with the film that I actually named the #1 film of 2016, Christine, from director Antonio Campos. And I've got a couple of co-hosts to do the show with me tonight. First, ladies and gentlemen, a troubled field reporter who wants to move to a better market after winning Jeopardy, but is stuck living with his mother in the cesspool of Peekskill, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Carroll is here.
Look, I mean, my mom moved up to Beacon, but I am still saddled with the children, so.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Also, with us, ladies and gentlemen, our handsome and sexy news anchor whose confident veneer hides a deep insecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Polis is here.
Hi, Jonathan. Nice to see you.
Welcome back, Matty P. And these guys are, have both worked with me a lot over the years, but they don't think they've ever met. And I think this is their first show together. Isn't that right, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
all right. Good. Inaugural voyage for Matty and Jim. So here is our schedule for this, our 65th series of episodes. It started this past Thursday, July 15th, with the review of the Marvel film Black Widow. And tonight, of course, is our Indie Spotlight Christine. This upcoming Thursday, July 22nd, will be our classic movie discussion of the film El Topo from 1970. And next Monday, July 26th, Matt Polis will be back for our 49th Sound Off, in which I'm going to do a book review. There's going to be a tweet beat where we answer some of your questions from our finale episodes, our top 10, Oscar preview, and of course, the 1970 in review. And Matt Polis and I are going to count down our top 5 films from 1970. Isn't that right, Matty P?
Oh, yeah.
Looking back to the trivia that I announced way back when we did our last indie, which I think was Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. I think Matt was on that episode back in the day. The trivia that I announced on that episode is that we will be looking at indies from 2016 this year. So it only makes sense for us to start with the film as that I named the top film of 2016 when we did the top 10 that year. Obviously, that film is Christine from director Antonio Campos, who incidentally was also the director of Jim Carroll's worst film of 2020, The Devil All the Time. It's really interesting that we're going to have that circularity. All right, guys, I'm going to move on to the summary. You guys good?
Yep.
Christine. The true story of Christine Chubbock, who is a field reporter in Sarasota, Florida, whose severe emotional problems hold her back from advancing in her industry and getting back to a major television market. She pushes to do better and more important stories in spite of the changing environment of television news. I'm carefully trying to dance around the conclusion. It's a true story, so a lot of people might know it, but some people don't. I think we're going to try and dance around revealing the exact ending of the movie. That's what we all agreed to earlier tonight. So Indie Spotlights, this is the opening thought segment usually, but Indie Spotlights are a little different. The one who recommends the film has to present the film to others. And normally this is where I would be explaining why I like the film. But as I said, I already talked about it on our top 10 films of 2016. So why not let my 2016 self talk about it? This is from our top 10 show that year, which aired on February 23rd, 2017. Take a look.
Which is time for an item number 1. And I doubt you've seen it. Not many people did. I got to see it at a sneak preview in July or August, I think. And the actors, some of the actors came and talked about it afterwards. And I didn't expect much, didn't know anything about it. But I think it's a super important movie and with some amazing performances. This is Christine.
Christine.
One of the things that comes up every now and then, but not often enough, is mental health care in the country, but also the world. It's a tough nut to crack, no puns intended.
I appreciate that, sure.
I mean, I thought it explored that, and Rebecca Hall's performance is a masterful work for an actor. It blew me away in so many ways. Once I saw it, I knew it was going to be hard to beat it. It was a pretty awesome movie.
So that's what I had to say in 2017. But now in early 2020, I rewatched a lot of my favorite films of the decade in preparation for the top 10 films of the decade show that we did. In reevaluating the films of that year, I decided to swap it with my number 2 film that year, which was Silence. So now if I redid that top 10 list, Christine would be 2 and Silence would be 1. I still think this film is outstanding, harrowing, and impactful. This is my 3rd time watching and I still bawled my eyes out. It wound up as my 18th favorite film of the decade, which is still pretty damn good. Now, you guys weren't on the show back then. Had you seen or heard of the movie before being assigned to it for this evening?
I had not. but I watched it and then watched your review of it, and it made me, as usual, think about the movie in a slightly different way. So I appreciated seeing your review of it in the 2 episodes that it came up in last year, or
5 years ago.
5 years ago. I just watched it now, so I'm not sure when it
Yeah,
was.
it's
Yeah.
new to you. So you had not even heard of the movie, Matt. Is that what I'm hearing?
I had not.
So Jim, had you heard of the movie when it came out?
I had heard of the movie. Actually knew the story before the movie. I hadn't gotten a chance to see it until...
All right, this is our first time watching it. So
was.
now it's time for opening thoughts. Jim historically is terrible at opening thoughts because it's supposed to be one sentence, and he has a hard time confining his thoughts in one sentence. Matt Poles is a lot better, so he gets to go first. Opening thoughts. What'd you think of the film?
I thought it was a great movie that, for me, mostly hinged on the performances.
Great opening thought. Nailed it. That's how we do it around here. Love it, ladies and gentlemen. Jim, can you beat it? One sentence or less.
I thought it was a moving and very effective character study.
Pretty good. These guys are getting it. I'm really proud of you guys getting the concept of opening thoughts. Jim, it's been a long journey to get to this point, so cheers to you, sir.
Thank you.
So we normally try and start with the thing that is the most positive about the film and work our way back. There are so many great things about this film. I don't really know where to start, but I'll start with the element that I called out on our Oscar preview that year, and Matt also mentioned it, and that is performances. Once again, I'm going to use a clip from the Oscar preview this time of a very ill me from that night 5 years ago, still February 23rd, 2017, naming my best actress of 2016. Take a listen.
Neither of you saw the movie that I'm going to pick, because I actually think this performance is one of the might go down as one of the all-time greats. And once again, this is Rebecca Hall as Christine, and I think it's the performance of the year in any category. I think the movie would be far less without this delicate, nuanced, complete portrait of this woman's battle with her own mental illness. Carefully avoided all the tropes of mentally ill characters. Christine was more functional. Rebecca Hall's performance in this movie is very, very special, I think. Will last a long time once it's eventually discovered.
So I was particularly effusive that night, and I'm also going to walk those comments back a little bit. I wound up not naming Rebecca Hall as the best actress of the decade. I went with Rachel Weisz in The Deep Blue Sea, but it was close. And Rebecca Hall is extraordinary to me. So much deeply felt detail, so much understanding of the pain and the confusion and executing that in an insightful, powerful way. I mean, I still think it was the best performance of 2016, and it was the second best lead actress performance of the decade in my mind. Does anybody actually know who won the Oscar that year for Best Actress in 2016?
I do not.
What are the choices?
Yeah.
She's behind me.
Oh, La La Land?
Emma Stone for La La Land was the winner. Great as Emma Stone is, I mean, Rebecca Hall is just way, way stronger in my mind. Before we get into some other performances, Rebecca Hall.
Oh, I mean, I thought she was magnificent. Her whole physicality was amazing. I thought she conveyed every single nuance of that character in every single scene.
It sounds like you agree with a lot of what I had to say 5 years ago.
I think I do agree a lot with your past self.
I see what he did there. Matt Polis, Rebecca Hall.
Her performance was the most important part of the film for me, because I do have some issues with the film, but if I reframe the movie as far as the arc of her character, it makes a lot more sense to me, and I enjoy it as a whole much better.
I certainly think this could be weighed amongst the best performances of the decade.
When I heard you say that in your previous show, after having watched it, it did help me think about it in those terms, which is what, like I said, it really helped me understand the movie better when I thought mostly about her rather than the themes and the plots.
She actually wasn't the only performance in the film that I shortlisted. Maria Ditzia also made my top 5 supporting actresses in 2016. Though she didn't come up in the Oscar preview because she came in 4th for me, but that's still Oscar worthy in my estimation. This performance, Christine, is everything you want a supporting performance to be, in a fully realized character that mostly listens into the ensemble until she's able to slowly reveal important depth and surprising growth. Whether it's ambition that she feels guilty about, reluctant empathy for Christine, or profound grief, Ditzia does an innocuously masterful job communicating all these ideas. She wasn't talked about a lot in the 2016 Oscar season, but I think she's extraordinary in this film. Does anybody have anything on Maria Ditzia?
Whenever she popped up, there was like a certain level of groundedness. She really added something to the scene. It wasn't sort of the side character to give information. It really did seem to shape the scenes that she was in a different way. So I did appreciate her whenever she was on there.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Let's see if Jim disagrees.
No, I mean, I'm gonna add on. I thought it was interesting to frame her character almost as a counterpoint to Christine Chubbock. They're moving very much, although you don't know it, very parallel lines.
Yeah. And I mean, but that slowly gets revealed, and I think her performance has a lot to do with that. Bringing out that aspect of her character elements as the film goes along. I don't want to dwell on some of the other performances, just for time reasons, but I actually didn't feel a false beat from the entire ensemble. And Matt sort of alluded to that in his opening remarks. I think Tracy Letts is meticulously wonderful. Michael C. Hall is deliciously vulnerable underneath a confident veneer. J. Smith-Cameron is heartbreakingly helpless. John Cullum is gleefully carefree. Great performances all around. Jim, you're the actor. Do you disagree?
I don't disagree.
Matty, anything on the other performances?
No, I actually, not in particular, although I did like the mom, J. Smith-Cameron.
She's a great stage actress. Great. I also thought the film had a top 5 screenplay for me in 2016, an Oscar-worthy screenplay. Frequently, when a film is as thoroughly researched as this one is, it can get bogged down in all the details they want to include. I really admired how well Craig Shilowich was able to include as much as he did without ever losing focus on the momentum or the storytelling. He used some of the details he discovered to advance the story in the meaningful way. For example, those to-do lists that she would write were real. The puppet shows, I think, for charity were extremely effective as a narrative device, putting herself on tape to test her on-screen presence. The pains in her midsection that turned out to be an ovarian cyst. The press release she typed out in advance of her act at the end. All those things add to the richness of the world. They were valuable insight into the character's state of mind and extremely effective pushing the story forward. And it wasn't just the research into the details of Christine Chubbock herself, but also into the larger themes of the film, which we'll get into in the T word shortly. Guys, I also appreciate the structure of the film. Christine really doesn't have the traditional arc of protagonists that might have. She has Mannix ups and downs, which is true to life and managed in the script without ever alienating the audience. Backstory information is left for us in little breadcrumbs, carefully embedded into the body of the narrative, whether it's about her moods or a previous incident in Boston, her sexual history, or her hopes and desires. I think that is the way to do exposition, almost revealing it in little bits and pieces as you go along, as opposed to voiceover. Nothing was forced in that way. If you really examine, I think the screenplay is very carefully executed. Matt, you said you might have some problems with the film. Is it related to this?
I don't disagree with any of the details you mentioned. It was all very well done. And maybe this is better for the themes discussion, but it's the progression of the themes and the amount of big themes that dovetailed in a way that I wouldn't call it misleading, but I also say it gets to a point where, for me, it got a little bit clouded as to the intent of the film at different points along the way. Looking back, maybe it's a little clearer, and I think second viewing would be really good for this movie. I wasn't as enamored with the structure.
It is definitely a character-driven piece. Again, I'm not sure that's a direct opposition to what you're saying. Hearing what you're saying, that's what made me feel like I needed to articulate. It's more about revealing what's going on with this character. And I mean, her trajectory is almost, is like this, which is unique, but I also found effective. I don't know if that is a response to what you're saying or you disagree with that specifically.
No, in fact, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, where when I frame the movie as an arc of her character, it reads better. But the film has some major themes in this movie, and the themes change, and they sort of morph over time, which is fine. You could describe the movie in many different ways, depending on what point you decided to describe it.
I will put the pin in this where we talk about the themes. I would say this. I think there's an A theme and B theme all the way through, and what do you think is maybe the main theme switches?
It's not traditional. I definitely agree that it is character-driven. It feels almost to me like it is the third act. If some other screenwriter had it, we would see something closer to like Ray, where we have to learn about the instigating incidents in Boston. We have to see her younger and see the past. Instead, we're sort of like starting right in the middle, like right at this critical point that leads up to everything. Almost
if you ask me, that is almost always better. When I'm developing scripts, I find I'm almost always cutting out the first act completely, and jumping right into it. That to me is, 9 times out of 10, the better way to do a screenplay. Well,
and that's what I like. When you find out that there were prior events, when they mentioned Boston, it makes you sit up a little bit. How does this apply to what I've seen already, and where is it going to from here?
Yeah, you realize there's a pattern.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you mostly agree with my comments about the screenplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty much on the same page for this one.
I love being on the same page. It's weird because it's probably bad television. I think the audience likes it when we argue, like on the top 10 films of 2020. For me personally, I like it when we agree. So it's amazing to me that this is the same guy that directed Jim's worst film of 2020.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, this is the time. It's time to talk about direction, because I agree that The Devil All the Time didn't work at all. Obviously, Antonio Campos is starting from what I think we agree is a better script in this case. But I did find a lot of his directorial choices here to be on point. I was really impressed with the way that Campos maintained tone and perspective of Christine Chubbock throughout the film. It's a combination of editing and shot selection that put us inside Christine's head and also inside her heart. Combined with that performance, those elements really allowed us to identify with her hopes, her frustrations, and often understand her bizarre behavior. Shot selection-wise, I think about a group therapy session where he frames Christine through the other participants, adding to her uncomfortable claustrophobia and also a small feeling that one often feels in those sterile environments. I also liked in the same scene the ping-ponging profile shots he employed during a game of what's called Yes But, where the two characters are operating on very different wavelengths. I also think about a 4th of July party that has a couple Steadicam shots that follow Christine where she's clearly not comfortable, and it passes by all sorts of little detailed subplots as we walk through. It gives us a sense of her feeling separated, distant from her coworkers. And a moment in that same sequence in a billiards room at the same party where Michael C. Hall delivers a monologue about his own struggles, but he remains in soft focus in the background. The sharp focus is on Christine in the foreground because it's not about his story. It's about how his story affects her. So these are small ways in which a director's choices impact the storytelling. It's very subtle stuff that doesn't call attention to itself, but is extremely effective. I think it's a great example of style informed by substance instead of the other way around. It's amazing to me that it's the same guy, because the other thing that is so different about Christine is all the performances are so strong. And in a movie that has so many strong performances, we often say that the director has to have some credit there, even if it's as simple as creating an environment conducive to exploration and experimentation. The results are clear, and he has to be commended for that. Strangely, several of the performances in Devil All the Time are way off. So clearly, this is not a consistent trait of his films, but it's hard to ignore the success of the direction of this film from many vantage points. It doesn't feel like the same person at all. I covered a lot of ground there. Jim, Antonio Campos for Christine.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the key word that you said that separates the two movies is heart. We see into Christine's heart. The Devil All the Time had no light. Everything was oppressive. And I think the key to Christine was seeing into her world and seeing that there was, the goodness that she wanted to try and do. It made you empathize and root for her. It becomes all that much more heartbreaking because you identify with wanting to help her.
All that is source material. That has nothing to do with Campos himself.
It's how you deal with the source material.
I think the take-home point that we're getting about Antonio Campos here is he added light to Christine, but did not add light to The Devil All the Time. In terms of tone, He found a way to find an emotional hook into this movie and identifying with the characters. Matty P, direction.
So I haven't seen Devil All the Time, but my exposure to Antonio Campos was this film, and I decided instead of Devil All the Time to watch Simon Killer. I'm guessing Devil All the Time is more like most of them, and Simon Killer to me is the outlier in terms of the structure and directorial craft involved. I like all those examples. I love the ones you called out, Jonathan, about the touches and the camera use and the foreground background. I thought those were great. Also in the very beginning, another one I can add is there's a background theme, plot line to this whole movie about technology and the move to video from film and the whole news empire. At the very beginning of the movie, for the first, probably 10 or 15 minutes, there's a heavy focus on technology and close-ups of gears and buttons. And it was a really nice, visceral technology survey. It actually stopped kind of abruptly for me.
The reason I think that was just right is because it was in the beginning and it was sort of an entree into this world. This was how things work back in 1974.
Yeah, but it was there the entire movie and it was kind of played with. And so that's another way he took control of the craft.
All right, guys, this is the segment everybody's looking forward to. Jim, what time is it? What time is it for?
It's time for themes.
And we call it T-Word. This is where we talk about themes of a film. Davey used to hate talking about themes. All the current people in the show really like this section, though, so maybe we shouldn't call it the T-Word anymore. I don't know, but it's fun. I alluded to this in my comments from the 2016 show. This film could have been a TV movie that uses the grisly aspects of the story in a shocking and salacious way. Instead, it's a harrowing portrait of the lack of understanding, both then and now, of mental health care, and the results when these things go unchecked. Her mom in the movie refers to her moods or her funk. She thinks it'll just pass. She obviously cares a great deal, but she doesn't really understand the reality or the gravity of the situation. I watch this movie and think if many of us worked with someone who behaves like Christine Chubbock did, we too would just write her off as temperamental and would likely avoid her. Not in a mean or an obvious way, but she might not get the invite to the movie or go out to drinks when we go to watch the game. We might keep our distance. We all likely know a Christine Chubbock perhaps on the fringes of our lives because in many cases we choose not to engage those that are difficult. But the fact remains that Chubbock and those like her are lost in their own minds and hearts, and don't really know how to deal with it. As the film suggests, sometimes they just want to be heard. This film is very detailed about the manic ups and frustrating lows associated with this level of mental illness. It also shows the calm the troubled person often feels in the day or days leading up to a suicide attempt and the fallout of a suicide for the friends, family, and coworkers of the victim. And what's beautiful to me about the film is that it's not just Christine. The film goes to great lengths to show that while Christine's issues are more severe, all of these characters are dealing with their own internal demons relating to mental health. And they all had their own ways of trying to deal with it, whether it be transactional analysis, self-help books, smoking, drinking, yelling, cursing, or ice cream. They and we are all trying to cope, which is why, as extreme as the story is, I also find it quite universal. That's why I find the last scene of the film so important to the film as a whole. So guys, I know there's another theme that got coming up, but the big one and the obvious one is mental health and mental health care. Matt, what do you think?
I think it was a great summary. I think I was really nice to hear that in a succinct and eloquent way. It was hard to watch, but also enlightening to watch. I mean, dealing with these things in your own life, even if you know them so well, just seeing it on screen represented this way is like, oh, just one more perspective to add to the experience of this.
Jim, was I eloquent, like Matt said?
Yeah. If you go in and have a movie about mental illness, the easy route or the expectation is they're going to hear voices. It's going to be big manic episodes. What I loved about this film is that it's not that. She is not most of the time writing behaviors that we would classify as crazy. But when looked in the aggregate, you see patterns of behavior. That is what I think was important about the film. It is not one thing. It is a collection of things that added together, you start to see.
Jim gets a bingo for that.
Hey!
Nailed it.
I think the mom character is particularly important because both of you have hit on how the public-facing social aspects are, and maybe she's on the fringe. But the mom's the exact opposite. It's the person that knows her the most and is the most aware of what's going on. Yet still she is sort of failing at really understanding what's going on and really trying to help and really wanting to help, but still unable to. And it's due to lack of understanding. Also, it's really hard for another human to do anything about that thing. I think she's the only character that kind of breaks through that social barrier and is like, this is the inside circle, and even still.
I think that's the most telling about where they were in mental health care. In my sum up, I use the word moods. She refers to it in this very sort of diminishing way that I think is really important insight into how that behavior was looked at, as something just like a mood swing instead of someone that actually needed a lot more help than was available to her. Part of that is a good segue to my next theme. And while this theme is far less important, both in the film and in life, it's still important politically. Now, when talking about the screenplay, I mentioned how I was impressed with maintaining this secondary theme without adversely impacting the primary mental health theme. And they actually call it out in the film in this very phrase, sensationalism of the news. One of the issues that Christine is dealing with is the feeling that her industry is moving further and further away from the integrity that she envisioned in having when she signed up. It's that perennial uncomfortable alliance between the news and commerce. News organizations are also businesses, and Chubbock was working at a time where the paradigm was shifting to the point where small news organizations like the one she worked at felt desperate enough to, let's not say alter or manipulate, let's say feature different news items. Nightcrawler from 2014 is a film that dealt with this head on, and John Oliver did as well recently relating to sponsored content. And the results of this shift are what we now have today, where we have several different news stations telling us very different stories. The commerce of news reporting has led to a situation where we as citizens often don't know who or what to believe. Many of us have chosen to have our favorite news source usually align with our political beliefs. We've decided that all others are just lying. But what scares me about this is that the others say the same thing about us, that we're just lying. And so where does the truth lie? We've obviously learned that state-sponsored news isn't the answer, but what I think the film shows to great effect is the beginning of the end as far as news integrity is concerned, without necessarily offering solutions. Christine Chubbock was perhaps one of the very first victims of the changing tides, that she became a major result of this idea of salacious news reporting. She became the story instead of the storyteller. So Guys, that's my other theme, sensationalism of the news. Jim, does that touch on what you were thinking about?
It does touch a little on that. And I think that is a key component. I also wanted to talk about the role that ambition plays, and that we have somebody in Christine who wants to be the best. Do I compromise who I am as a person to achieve the goals that I need to, even if I find them distasteful? Everybody's own personal ambitions are also writ throughout the movie, right up until the very last scene where the Mary Tyler Moore song plays. She's gonna make it after all. What a cap.
Ambition, I didn't have it, but and I'd like to dig into it, but I think it's tangentially related to both themes. The insecurities lead to the ambition, which leads to the spiral of the mental health, but also the shifting of news, how that interacts with her ambition as well. So I think it's tied to both of them. But I would like, if you won't, maybe Matt will talk about the sensationalism of news a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I had this sort of cascading series of themes. The focus seemed to spread of this movie, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing looking back, especially after this discussion. It's all gelling together. But for example, I wrote these 3 questions. Is this story about a principled journalist who is struggling to produce quality content in a competitive lowest common denominator environment? Or is this story about a driven person that will do anything to get ahead? Or is this a story about a person who's suffering from mental illness who happens to work at a news channel? Each of those things, I would have answered, this is what it's about at different points. Each one sort of erased or muddled the importance of the previous one to now we know what it's all about. It's that last one. So it's more of just a context for the ultimate theme, which I think we would agree upon as the mental illness piece, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as I'm going through this movie. But I was just thinking it was a little bit spread out, a little bit defocused, because there are 3 major themes. A whole movie could be mad about each of them. And I thought this movie was about each of them at different points in the movie is kind of what I was getting at.
I was going to answer yes to all 3 if that was possible.
Right.
But that's what I liked about it. Because I mean, to me, it's layered and it's rich. I would disagree with that they muddled each other. I actually thought they worked well in concert with one another. And I think they informed one another in a positive way.
I think they work in concert. I think because it's more of a character-driven piece, those themes have a little bit more room to play with each other than if you were just going for a straight, this is point A, point B, point C.
Because I don't want to make it sound like I didn't like it or don't appreciate it. I think it worked well.
Part of that is mental health is so universal. I think it does become more important as the movie goes along. Globally speaking, it probably is the more important existential theme. Just by nature of our own sensibilities, because this is such a wide-reaching theme, it becomes more important. So my third theme, guys, is that Florida is a cesspool. That's the other thing I got from the movie. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah. Is that even does that need to be discussed? I mean, that's just.
Let's break it down. In lieu of closing thoughts tonight, in all seriousness, I'd like to reach out to the audience for a moment and say, if any of you out there recognize yourselves in Christine Chubbock or feel similarly to her, or even if it's slightly different, but still weighing down your heart, soul, and mind, I implore you to take that first step, raise your hand, and ask for help. It may seem scary at first, but feeling better has to start somewhere. And those of us who want to help often need you to let us know that something is wrong. For better or worse, we can't always rely on others to realize something is wrong with us. We need to speak up. As many of you out there know, Society member Kelly O'Malley runs an organization called Light in Dark Places that can help with resources for you, places to go, people to talk to. You can visit lightindarkplaces.org for more information. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please call 1-800-273-8255 or text START to 741-741. And hell, if you need someone to talk to, I'll talk to you. I've got nothing else to do if you want. Matt and Jim will not talk to you because they have no souls, but I am happy to listen to you guys for a while. But please take that first step. As trite as it may sound, I do believe it. A lot more people are here for you than you might think. So guys, I hope you guys don't mind me stealing your closing thoughts, but it seemed like an appropriate thing to do for tonight's show.
No, that's fine.
Here is the trivia for the next indie. Back to our top 10 of 2016, to one of J Money's favorite films from 2016 for a film that I did not enjoy. And the same director of that indie would come back in 2017 with Davy's favorite film of that year, and then back in 2018 with a film that won an acting Oscar. And so that'll be our next indie for the next for a month or so from now. Our next show, however, is coming up this Thursday, where we're going back to 1970 to dig deeper on a random Western that didn't come up at all in our reviews of the film that year. Alexander Jodorowsky's El Topo. That's coming up on Thursday night. In the meantime, let's say goodbye to the audience, everybody.
Goodbye, audience.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.